Welcome to another segment of Heal Thyself Benefits of Holistic Living. I'm Mia Saenz, your host, and with me in this segment is Raphael Cushnir. And he is a leading expert in emotional connection. He's a public speaker internationally, and he's an author. And we're so happy to have you. Welcome.
Oh, great. I'm really thrilled to be with you.
Thank you so much. Before we get into all the juiciness of your work, can you please share with us, and the audience wants to know all about our speakers. So would you share a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are? Because part of the shifting and the changing in consciousness is wanting to shift and change.
Yeah. Well, all of my life led me to this work, but in a completely indirect fashion. So earlier in my life, I was a teacher, I was a filmmaker, I was an activist, and really had no inkling that this is where I was headed. And then, in a kind of a classic dark night of the soul, my whole life fell apart in the middle of the 90s. And I didn't really know where I was going, what I was doing, but it was really working with that pain in new and different ways that led to a healing and transformation that really started let's say, the second chapter of my life. And therefore, what's important to know about me is that I'm not about particular credentials or expertise. As a matter of fact, the second chapter of my first book is called Don't Believe a Word I Say, because it's really what I'm sharing from my own experience. I mean, I've been doing this now for over 15 years and I've worked with thousands of people, but over and over again, I say, let's test this out in the laboratory of your own life. Let's not hide behind, you know, um, like I said, letters, accreditations. If it works, great. If it doesn't, you'll set it aside. But most importantly, what I would love for listeners to do is to take anything they hear today, and if it does work, customize it for them personally. How is it going to work specifically for who they are and what their wants and needs are?
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. And then toss the rest away because it's not important. I love
Exactly.
that. I say that too, so I like that. Of course, I
Good,
like
good.
that.
Well, I just want to tell a joke before we get started then.
Sure.
So a guy walks into a bookstore and says to the clerk, "Can you please direct me to the self-help section?" And the clerk says, "Well, I could, but wouldn't that defeat the purpose?"
That is very funny.
Yeah. And one more joke. There's a guy I know who once told me, and let's see if I can get this right. He said there's three kinds of self-help. The first kind is, this worked for me, but it won't work for you. The second kind is, this didn't work for me and it won't work for you. And the third kind is, um, I forget the third kind, but basically the whole idea is that most of our, let's say, industry is a little bit of a racket in that sense. Like
Yeah,
let's brush all of that away and
right.
meet in the sort of raw, vulnerable, naked heart of things, person
Hmm.
to person, life to life, and that's really the only thing that matters.
It is. And as you stated, not everything's going to work for each person. That's why it's so fabulous to have these type of interview series because there's 40 speakers here that are
Mm.
sharing their own perspective. So not everybody follows my work, not everybody follows, well, yes, they follow your work. Not everybody follows Joe Schmo's work, but you know what I'm saying, that they pick and choose what suits them. So with that, let's jump into what you talk about, which is, I'm going to ask you, what is emotional nature?
Well, I think that the first thing that we can say is that we're all emotional beings. We come into the world with a rich emotional feedback system, but no operating instructions. And most of us really get lost along the way because we have really either no models or bad models for how we are meant to work with our emotions for the highest good of ourselves and others. And so even before we get to what is emotional connection, we have to talk about what is an emotion. This is something that is, even new for most of us to assess directly. It's like we kind of know it because we live it all the time, but what is it? What is it really?
Mm-hmm.
And part of the reason why I took my work out of the broader realm of how to be present, which is super important, and started to telescope it into how to be present to our emotions, is because pretty much everybody, even seasoned meditators, have the greatest challenges around being present when it comes to difficult or challenging emotions. And so I'm going to give you a working definition in a moment, but I just want to back up for a quick second and say that there is a reason why we need the operating instructions. And it has to do with the fact that our brains are structured in a way that is kind of cross-circuited, that one part of our brain really wants us to experience our emotions and another part of our brain really doesn't.
Mhm.
And that's just courtesy of the messy way evolution moves forward. And so if we don't have any understanding about this, we'll just kind of stumble and bumble along. But once we do start getting understanding about it, then things can really change for the better wherever we've seemed that we're hopelessly stuck. And so with that as an introduction, the simple working definition we can use for an emotion is that an emotion is a message from your mind delivered to your body as a physical sensation.
Mhm.
And it's really important to say, first of all, not just your brain, because your mind, meaning the sum total of your intelligence, is distributed throughout your body. We have heart intelligence, we have gut intelligence, we have neurotransmitter intelligence. So it's from your mind, but it's delivered to your body as a sensation, which means that all emotions are physical. The only place that you will ever experience the rising, the moving around, and ultimately the dissipating of an emotion is in your physical body, which means that in order to be a good emotional connector, you have to take the elevator downstairs, so to
Mhm.
speak.
Mhm.
And so that's the working definition that we use in this work, that begins to allow us to figure out how to do it effectively.
Mhm. Awesome. And what kept coming to me was emotional intelligence. I know that a lot of us talk about that, but I like how you specifically shared that it does affect our body and different aspects of our body, because we don't often think about that. When we think about an emotion or something, we do feel it. You're absolutely right, and there's some memory there too. Wouldn't you say that if something triggers that emotion in a certain part in your stomach or your heart or your breathing, that there's a memory that it can make us more frightened or more anxiety if we don't step back and deal with it
Right.
and
Well,
correct it.
so we're constantly learning about our emotional life through what happens
Mhm.
to us, but then that also means that we see the present through the lens of the past.
Mhm.
And we especially do that if we haven't cleared the emotional backlog from previous experiences. So, what I support people in doing is getting on the wave of an emotion in their body in the present moment and surfing that from a place of contraction to one of expansion. But in that process, we also kind of open up the floodgates, hopefully in a gentle way, so that it's not just the emotion of this moment that we're surfing, but it's also the backlog. And the more that we surf into presence, the more that that backlog diminishes. And then we get to actually kind of polish the lens of our perception and our experience. So then we're feeling mostly what's here now, and we're seeing and understanding what's here now more clearly.
Mhm. That's awesome. I like the way you described that. Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about the emotional nature connection intersection with our thinking. I guess that's what you were just saying. And I pulled these off of his website, everyone. So I'm sorry I have to look down at my notes, but that's the way we're rolling today.
No worries.
Awesome. So share with us the connection of the intersection with the mind. You were sort of talking about that.
Yeah, well, one of the things I can say that might be really simple and helpful is that feeling is essential and thinking is essential. And in order to have the best possible life, we need to be able to access both of those skills or aspects of being alive in the most effective way. And the key thing to recognize is that you've got to feel first and then think later if you want to trust your thinking.
Okay.
Because what happens so often is that the abstract problem solving part of your brain thinks of an emotion as a problem to solve. So it's making a big show of being rational, but it's really trying to get rid of the emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And emotions can't be solved or fixed. They actually need to be felt, or they will stay in your body and create that backlog that I was talking about before.
Mm-hmm.
So if you feel first and go from that state of contraction to one of expanded presence that I was mentioning earlier, then you've got the optimum internal environment to think as creatively and clearly as possible. So feel first, think later is a simple thing to remember about that.
Mm-hmm. And thinking later doesn't necessarily mean 2 or 3 hours later. You can think within a few minutes, correct?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Just to clarify for people.
Sure.
Yeah.
The hallmark is whether I feel open and in flow and in connection to myself and to what's going on outside of me. Like think of when you take a shower and that warm water is cascading over you and your pores are literally open, but you also
Mm-hmm.
start to feel kind of
Mm-hmm.
that quality of a relaxing exhale. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to feel good or
Mm-hmm.
positive, but if you can say, I feel open
Mm-hmm.
and able to be with whatever is here in this moment, that's the point at which you can start thinking and trust your thoughts.
Mm. Like that. It's also very interesting how I'm just bringing this up, how water actually does change our clears our essence so that we can think differently and clearly. I guess that's probably because we have so much water in our body, period. You know, that we are, I consider us water creatures, even though we don't live in the water, because our
Well,
bodies
well,
contain so much.
and maybe that's why the metaphor that I use the most often to talk about how to feel your feelings successfully is surfing.
Mm-hmm.
Because, when you're a surfer in the ocean,
Mm-hmm.
got two things moving together in a kind of exquisite union. You've got the surfer on the board and then the wave beneath.
Mm-hmm.
And when you stay really connected to the micro movements of that wave all the way through the ride,
Mm-hmm.
you'll get to shore.
Yeah.
And so the best way to think about how to connect emotionally in your body is to think of your attention as the surfer
Mm-hmm.
and the experience that you're having in your body as the wave. And the important thing to recognize in that is that you can't surf a wave from the shore.
Right.
So that means
You have
that
to get
rather,
into it.
yeah, like other things like thinking or even, memories, images, when you're in meditation, you can kind of see the movie going by and you can watch from a distance. But with emotions, you've actually got to go towards them and get on the wave where they are. So if you're feeling resentment in your gut, you've got to bring your attention right there to the wave where it is. Or if you're feeling a tightness in your throat, same thing. But surfing is what actually allows you to feel the feeling the way that it needs you to feel it so that then it can let go and
Mm-hmm.
release.
To ride it, yeah, awesome. I used to surf when I was between 16 and 22, so
Mm-hmm.
yeah, yeah, that was pretty awesome. All right, so let's talk about healing anxiety. No, let's talk about healing it. Sorry, I'm going to edit this. Mia, edit this part. Okay, just so I know. Um, let's talk about. Let me redo that part. So I'm looking at you. Let's talk about addiction and compulsion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, so I mentioned before that the way evolution has wired us is kind of tricky. And basically, one part of our brain, the primitive part of our brain, can't distinguish between uh, an external threat like footsteps in a dark alley and an internal threat like hurt or longing or grief. So when that emotion gets generated and basically is saying, feel me,
Mm-hmm.
the primitive brain thinks that that's life threatening. And so it basically says, no way, and tries to shut down the whole thing. And the reason that's important in terms of your question about addictions and compulsions is that even though it tries to shut down that negative feeling or painful feeling, it can't do it completely. It will leak through because that's just the way we are.
Mhm.
And so it needs reinforcements. And the best reinforcements that it has to try to block feelings are addictions and compulsions. So a simple, good way to think about addictions and compulsions are a choice not to feel what is present. And once we get that, we can start to learn how to make a different choice. And once we start being willing and able to feel what is present, even the hard stuff, then the attraction and the need for those addictions and compulsions, and even the intensity of them, starts to fall away.
Mhm. Because we're not holding on to them so tightly.
Right, we actually recognize, oh, the thing that it's meant to do, which is keep me from feeling,
Mhm.
is something that I am now able and willing to do. And I recognize it's the deeper need for my highest good. So I choose it willingly, even if I don't like it or wish that I'd be feeling this way. I still turn toward the feeling rather than away from it, because I know that's how healing happens. That's how presence deepens. And that's all that I want in my life. So we start to build the skill to make a different choice. And then also at the same time, the, the pull of those addictions and compulsions lessens for us too.
Mhm. It's very interesting because addiction and compulsion is one of the hardest things to overcome just because people don't understand it like that. You know,
Hmm.
they get,
Yeah.
whether it's sexual, whether it's alcohol, no matter what pulls us, whatever our addiction is, we find the comfort within, you know, the human nature finds a comfort within that that addiction in order to mask it, to cover it. So it's very interesting. I like this conversation just because in the kind of work that we do, you and I and others who are working to help shift and change lives through transformation, when we see this, you know, we've gone through it ourselves, and to recognize whatever, you know, it may not be something super duper like, you know, heavy duty addiction or compulsion, but we all as humans have had them. So
Hmm.
it's very powerful, and there are a lot of people who just can't get from one side to the other. So patience with yourself is one of them, right?
Yeah, and there's a book I wrote called "The One Thing Holding You Back," and in chapter 10, it's all about addiction and compulsion. And basically, in that chapter, I talk about something that I call done deal delay, and this has to do with what sometimes is referred to in psychology as distress tolerance. But basically, before you can get to that underlying feeling that your primitive brain has been trying to block,
Mm-hmm.
you have to be able to be with the distress of not going for the addiction or the compulsion. And usually what happens is that once the switch gets flipped, I'm going to have that cigarette. It doesn't matter whether you're going to have it in 30 seconds or whether you're going to have it 3 hours from now when you get off the plane. It's that you've already decided.
Mm-hmm.
So what done deal delay refers to is, instead of willpower, like, no, I'm not going to do that, which never works because you push one way and then you get pushed back another way. Instead you say, okay, well, maybe I'll have that cigarette, but also maybe not. Let me see if, once I'm available to it, like, off the plane, let
Mm-hmm.
me just give myself, let's say, a minute just to feel what's here while I'm not going for that usual choice.
Mm-hmm.
And at first there's a lot of agitation and anxiety, but after just a short amount of time, if I extend it from 1 minute to 2 minutes to 3 minutes over a period of practices, then I start to watch that distress dissipate. And then I just might be feeling sad
Mm-hmm.
or alone or hurting. And now I've got the choice to meet the deeper need, which is for that emotion to be felt, which then will start the healing process, not just of that emotion, but also the addiction or the compulsion. So we've got to be able to get through that initial distress. And that's one of the reasons why it's so difficult.
And I love the word self-discovery now, because as a conscious self-love teacher, I've realized to hit mainstream society, we have to use different words so that
Hmm.
people aren't scared away. So self-discovery is so amazing. And when you do discover this about yourself and you allow yourself choices and you are able to talk to yourself and have yourself listen, it's really brilliant. I love the work you're doing. Thank you. It's amazing.
Sure. Well, I would add something to what you were saying.
Yes.
I really appreciate that whole idea of self-discovery, and that is that self-intimacy and self-vulnerability are what determine the kind of relationship that you can have with another person.
Mhm.
So if you're looking at your life and you're saying, I haven't really had successful, meaningful, quality relationships with other people, the very best place that you have to shift that is to start paying attention to the places in you that you have previously either ignored, pushed away, or exiled.
Mhm.
Because all of those places need to be a part. They need to be included in your overall experience. So your your hurt, your anger, your fear. The idea is not to let them run wild. That's not even what they want to do. The idea is to say, you can be with me. I can create a space inside of myself where you get to be who you are. And that's all they ever want. That's the home that they want. And when
Right.
you start to be a person who can let your internal emotional life be a part of you in that way, then automatically you start to be more interested in other people who can do that themselves and also who
Mhm.
can do that with you.
Mhm.
So, in my work with my individual clients, I'm constantly saying the relationship that you have with you is what determines what's possible for you with
Mhm.
another.
It's so true. And I don't know if you find this, I'm sure you're going to say yes, but the more you do this, it's really, really fun when you see yourself progressing and working through stuff. I kind of look at it at times, like as we're talking, I don't know why, but I'm thinking of like it's like almost like a game, because what can I do now? How can I shift and change this? We truly are magnificent creatures. And this is one ability that shows us how amazing we truly are.
Well, it's funny though that you said that you're sure I would say the same thing because actually what I would say is something a little bit different. I would
Okay.
say it's simple what we're
Mhm.
talking about. It needs to be
Yeah,
simple for it to work, but it's not easy a lot of the time. And
it's
so
not.
that fun that you're talking about does happen from time to time and then ultimately kind of takes deeper root. So you just
Mhm.
experience the greater joy even in, let's say, sorrow, like because I'm choosing to embrace all that life
Mhm.
brings me, but there are definitely places along the way, especially at earlier times, where it feels grueling, it feels
Of course.
endless, and um, not fun. And so part of supporting people is saying, if you stay with you, I'll stay with you. And
Mhm.
the one thing that I can promise you from having done this on my own and done this with thousands of people
Mhm.
is this that you're feeling right now doesn't stay. It may take longer than you wish, and it may be way more intense than you wish, but stick with it. Stick
Mhm.
with me, and we'll get there. And so I think it's really important to be honest about that because
Well, it
especially
does take
especially in the beginning, it's
Well,
hard.
of course. Well, I've been doing this my whole life. I've been a metaphysician my whole life. And so but I had also really, as people who know my work, really grueling hard times. So I'm not trying to make light of but when you've practiced and practiced and it's become your most favorite thing to do is to work on yourself, it does become fun. So I guess saying that, yes, it's very, very hard at first. We all know that. We
Mhm.
all experience that. But the more we invest in ourselves, we see that investment. And I guess that's the fun I'm talking about
Got it. Got
is,
it.
because it's an investment in me, it's an investment in you, it's an investment in somebody that we're working
Right. And one of the things that I like to say is, I look forward to the next time that I will feel whatever you could say, jealousy, resentment, hurt, because that next time is going to give me one more opportunity to open to it
with.
more fully.
Yeah.
And that's to me what life is about.
hmm Exactly. That's awesome. So let's talk about one more topic before you share your free gift, and which is very cool, by the way. So let's talk about healing anxiety and depression.
Hmm. Uh, well, let's start with anxiety. So I think of anxiety as not so much a feeling, but a fear of feeling.
Mhm.
It's a kind of emergency signal that needs to be addressed in the moment, but actually, it's the brain's distraction from what it feels is the deeper threat.
Mhm.
So, like I've sat with people in panic attack, for instance, and they feel like they're dying, take me to the hospital.
Mhm.
And if I support them in just coming right back to this moment, what are you feeling? Oh, my heart is pounding crazily. My hands are all clammy. My stomach is churning. Okay, can you just stay with that for another few moments? Just let that feeling be. Let's create a soft and gentle space in which it can keep happening. I'll stay with you. Then, so most of the time, what happens is maybe that will start to pass, and then somebody will say, I'm angry,
Mhm.
or I'm just devastated.
Mhm.
And what's so important is that they recognize a moment ago they thought they were dying and had to go to the hospital, and now they're just feeling a raw human emotion.
Mhm.
And so that's the intense version, but everyday anxiety works in a similar way. If you meet it where it is and how it's experiencing, how you're experiencing it in your body, it will start to settle and then put you in touch with what's underneath. And sometimes you've got to go through the anxiety to get there, but you can get there. And then you'll have less anxiety over time because the brain does learn, it updates, and it realizes, oh, that thing I was throwing out the emergency signal to distract you from isn't so dangerous.
Mhm.
So now I don't need to keep producing that signal in the same way. So
Right.
that's anxiety. Depression's kind of on the other side of the spectrum. So to me, depression is exactly what it sounds like. It's a pushing down. So the emotion needs to be met and felt and cleared. And so once you won't feel it, it doesn't go away. It stays in your unconscious and it keeps trying to get you to pay attention to it so it can come up and out and fulfill its mission. But the longer that you keep the lid on it, there becomes this kind of stalemate that takes all of your life energy. The emotional energy is pushing up, you keep pushing it down. And so there's no more energy left for life, and you become listless and depressed.
Mhm.
And so, for most people, not everyone, for the vast majority of people, when you take the lid off of that feeling and you actually start tuning into it, even if it is, let's say, a very deep sadness, that's just an emotion. That's not depression.
Mhm.
And so, feeling deep and difficult emotions are just a part of life. They're part of what gives richness to life.
Mhm.
And so, I guide people in this work to recognizing the difference between what we kind of, in culture call depression. We just say, I'm depressed. But a lot of times, what we really just mean is, I'm having difficult feelings.
Mhm.
Um, but where the depression comes in is when we say no to those feelings. And when we start saying yes to them, we're just not depressed.
Mhm.
We don't need medication, and there's no problem. There's just maybe a difficult wave to ride.
Mhm. Very interesting. Thank you.
Sure.
Those were both described very nice. So share with us your free gift because it's awesome.
Sure. So I have a 4-part series, which is called The Hidden Power of Emotions, which are basically 4 10-minute videos of me walking through very specifically the practices and principles of emotional connection that people can use to heal and especially to get unstuck in terms of any kind of life goals that they have known that they're ready to move forward with, but haven't quite been able to take those steps. And so those 4 videos are the gift I'd like to offer people today. And then also, I like to tell people, once you've met me, you can't get rid of me. So that's just because I love this work and I love
Yeah.
sharing it. So after people watch those videos, I know that through your series there'll be information on how to contact me.
Yes.
So part of the gift is for people to be free and welcome to contact me, and anything that I can share to
Awesome.
further clarify all the work, I'd be happy to do it.
That's awesome. Thank you very, very, very much. Would you like to share one last piece of goodness that your heart is telling you to share with us?
Hmm. Okay, let me pause and really feel into that question. Well, I think what's coming up for me to say right now is that we are not skin encapsulated beings, and therefore we're not meant to do this work alone. And so, what I would like to share with people is that, I've been doing this work for decades and I've been teaching it for a really long time. And so, you could say I know exactly how to do it and I've kind of graduated from needing support, which is exactly the opposite of the truth. So, I would like, viewers and listeners to know that this kind of emotional connection support that I offer in my work, I choose to have in my life. I work with someone who kind of holds the presence with me the way I do with others. And so the deeper that we get into this work and the more fulfilled we are, we realize that relationships are the only thing ultimately that matter.
Mhm,
And so it's not about becoming more and more independent. And it's definitely not about becoming more and more dependent, but it's
mhm,
really about becoming more interdependent.
mhm. And we truly are social creatures, aren't we?
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
I love that you said that because so many people do say, oh, I've been doing this on my own for years. Well, even the best coaches, and I'm going to include myself in one of those, we always have somebody that supports us. It's smart.
Yeah, and I'll just add one thing is that you hear in the metaphysical community so often the idea that you create your own reality. And what I like to say about that is that's only half the story. The other half of the story is that your reality creates you. And so everything is impacting you all the time in the environment that you live in. So if you want to actually have the greatest possible reality, one of the things that you want to do is surround yourself with other people who are able and willing to provide that kind of support for you, because then the external reality impacts the internal reality in the best possible way.
Mm. I love that. You were just phenomenal. Thank you so much. Now I know why people love to come and see you speak. So thank
Oh,
you.
thank you. It's been
It
a
was
pleasure.
awesome. It was wonderful to have you. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you in another segment. Bye.